Hello friends. You look tired. Let's drift back, not just a few years, but a couple thousand. To a time when sandals slapped stone roads and people clapped for combat. Tonight, we step inside the roar of the Roman Colosseum. Not to fight, don't worry, just to watch. Quietly, curiously, sleepily. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Let's begin with the deadly fate of Roman gladiators. You wake to the muffled roar of a distant crowd. It rumbles through the stone like thunder trapped underground. Above you, faint slivers of sunlight slice through narrow arches. Somewhere beyond the thick walls, trumpets blare in crooked triumph. The horns are sharp, echoing with just enough chaos to remind you that this is no celebration. This is theater, and the curtain is rising. The ground beneath your feet is not soft. It's compacted sand, gritty and uneven, pressed down by the weight of years and suffering. It smells faintly of metal and memory. A little sweat, a little blood, a little something no one ever talks about. You blink, still adjusting. The tunnel you're in opens into a massive oval of stone, arches stacked like the ribs of some ancient beast. You are inside the Flavian amphitheater, though the people of your time have already begun calling it something else. Something more fitting of its presence. The Colosseum, named not for its shape, but for the colossal statue of Nero that once stood nearby, watching like a stone god. You're standing in the vomitorium, not, despite popular myths, a place for nobles to casually relieve themselves of too much goo. No, this is a passage, one of many, that allows thousands of Romans to pour into the seats above, like ants spilling from a cracked hill. And here you are, in the dark of that narrow artery, about to be pushed into light. A low creak behind you. A wooden gate is slowly rising. With it comes the scent of warm sawdust and the unmistakable tang of anticipation. Your hand clenches instinctively around the leather-wrapped grip of your weapon. You are not a spectator today. You are the spectacle. To your left, a vast canopy stretches across the top of the arena. The velarium, a giant awning designed to protect spectators from the sun, flutters like a ship's sail. Slaves perch on ropes high above to adjust its angles. Their shadows dance faintly across the limestone tiers. To your right, rows upon rows of Romans sit, stand and jostle for a better view. The wealthy ones lounge in the shade, sipping wine and fanning themselves with feathers imported from somewhere too expensive to name. The poorer ones shout louder, trying to catch the attention of the emperor, whose box stands elevated like a judgment throne. He's draped in purple, looking out with the practiced indifference of someone who's seen it all. His hand rests on the arm of his chair near the thumb. Not his thumb, just a thumb. Up, down, that part's still debated. Either way, you hope he forgets you exist entirely. The sand beneath your feet shifts. It's warm, bone dry and clean. Cleaner than you'd expect for a killing floor. But that's part of the show. Wet sand made for muddy fights and messy outcomes. Romans preferred clarity. If blood spilled, they wanted it visible. Sharp, red, dramatic. You take a deep breath. Your armor, strapped hastily this morning by someone in a worse mood than you, chafes slightly at the shoulder. It's not made for comfort, it's made for theater. Every piece has been crafted for someone else's eyes, not your survival. Your helmet gleams a little too brightly. Your greaves feel uneven, but you don't adjust. Not now. Around you, the others prepare. Some murmur to themselves. A prayer maybe. A chant. Something ancestral. One man spits 3 times over his shoulder. Another rubs a carved bone charm tucked under his wrist guard. Everyone has a ritual. Everyone has a reason. One Rotarius, a light-armed gladiator, armed with a net and trident, twirls his net thoughtfully, like he's trying to remember if he fed it this morning. Another man, a murmillo, with heavy armor and a fish-crested helmet, simply stands still, eyes closed. You wonder if he's meditating or sleeping, or trying not to vomit. The Colosseum isn't quiet anymore. The noise builds with every heartbeat. Drums pound. The audience chants something rhythmic, though you can't quite make it out. A few call out names. Some are names of heroes. Some are names of the dead. Your fingers tighten again. You weren't always here. You weren't always this. You were once a farmer, or a thief, or a soldier who made the wrong enemy. Maybe you volunteered, hoping for gold and glory. Maybe someone sold you, traded your fate for a bag of grain, or a political favor. It doesn't matter. Not anymore. Now you are a gladiator. Your weapon. Maybe you hold a gladius short and sharp, designed for close quarters and maximum efficiency. Maybe you're wielding a scotum, the large curved shield of a samnite, or perhaps you've been assigned the dreaded pairing of sicker and manica, a curved blade and an arm guard that makes every swing feel like an act of desperation. There's no telling what your opponent will bring. You won't know until the gate rises. But you do know this. You are here to fight, not necessarily to win, just to entertain. Rome doesn't always demand victory, but it always demands a good show. You look up. The sun is bright now, caught high above the arena rim. It gleams off polished armor, flashes in the eyes of onlooker. Somewhere above, a woman drops her goblet in surprise. It shatters. No one notices. Not really. A lion roars behind the far gate. Somewhere, another beast grunts low, frustrated. You hear a chain being tested. The gate beside you begins to rise. Slowly, deliberate, a mechanical ritual designed for suspense. Light pours in, golden, blinding, and now, you step forward. Your first foot touches the sand of the arena floor, and then the next. You walk, not fast, not slow. Every eye in the stadium turns to you. You are the opening act, the main event, a heartbeat wrapped in iron, a myth in the making, or a memory, fading quickly into the next. Welcome to the Colosseum. The show has begun. You weren't born for this. No one is. No baby has ever arrived into the world clutching a wooden sword and shouting Ave Imperator. No one dreams of sand and steel, not at first. And yet somehow here you are. So how does it happen? Let's rewind a bit. Long before your feet touch the arena, before the crowd chants your name or forgets it entirely, you were just another person caught in the gears of the Roman Empire. Maybe you were taken in war, a prisoner from Gaul or Germania, dragged across provinces in iron chains, or maybe you were a slave born into service, property from your first breath. Perhaps you were a common criminal, sentenced not to death, but to the long, slow theater of dying for someone else's amusement. Or maybe you volunteered. Yes, that happened too. Some men chose this life out of desperation, out of debt, out of an insatiable thirst for fame, and the chance to hear strangers chant their name just once. Gladiators were often feared, sometimes admired, and occasionally beloved. There was a strange, brutal glory in it, the same kind that makes people slow down to watch a fire. But before you can enter the arena, before you even hold a weapon, you go through training. And no, not the fun montage kind. You're sent to a ludus, a gladiator school, not a school with scrolls and ink, but one with bruises and sand, the kind of place where every day begins with a shout and ends with a limp. Some of the most famous schools were in Capua and Pompeii, the most elite, the Ludus Magnus, right next to the Colosseum itself, close enough to hear the screams echo off the walls as you eat breakfast. The school is run by a lanista, a sort of gladiator coach / manager / owner. If gladiators are prize fighters, the lanista is the promoter who sees profit in pain. He buys, trains, disciplines, and occasionally sells you, like livestock that occasionally bleeds too much. You're assigned a cell, Spartan, cramped, shared. There's a small straw mattress, a clay jug of water, and not much else. Privacy is a fond memory. Each morning starts the same. Before the sun even brushes the rooftops, you're up. You stretch. You run laps around the sand yard until your legs protest. You lift weights made of stone. You spar. You learn to fall dramatically, safely, convincingly, and you drill, again, and again, and again. A wooden sword, the rudis, is your first companion, heavier than steel, designed to build strength. You swing it until your arms forget what rest feels like. You stab dummies filled with straw. You block, and parry, and repeat, until the sand drinks your sweat, and asks for more. Instructors watch close. Former gladiators, mostly scarred veterans, who walk with limps, and teach with growls. They correct your stance, your timing, your breathing. They do not offer praise, only silence. And when you finally hear one mutter, "Not terrible," you feel something close to pride. You're given a type. Gladiators were not just fighters, they were characters, cast like actors in a deadly drama. If you're built for speed and finesse, you might become a retiarius, armed with a net, and trident, light armor, no helmet, agile, vulnerable, flashy. If you're broad and strong, perhaps a cicuta, heavy shield, short sword, smooth helmet with only 2 small eye holes to prevent a trident from poking in, a thrax, with curved blade and ornate helmet, a hoplomachus, modeled after Greek warrior, a demachares, wielding 2 blades like a martial artist with trust issues. Each role has strength, each has flaws, each is designed to be part of a visual and tactical matchup. Gladiators were paired carefully, like chess pieces, light versus heavy, fast versus armored, net versus blade. The point wasn't fairness, it was entertainment. And so you train, you bleed, you learn to endure, your body changes, your muscles harden, your mind sharpens, you stop flinching at pain, you start measuring opponents by how they shift their feet. The school provides food better than most slaves get. Bread, beans, sometimes meat. They need you healthy, or at least alive. Occasionally, there are doctors. Gladiator schools had surprisingly advanced medical care, considering their purpose. A limping fighter doesn't sell tickets. So your cuts are cleaned, your bones are set. Sometimes you bond with others, even as you train to one day face them. A strange fraternity forms, equal parts brotherhood and rivalry. Some become friends, others, future enemies. At night, in your cell, you sometimes hear distant cheering. You imagine the Colosseum, the sand, the heat, the moment. You wonder if you'll freeze, if you'll win, if you'll leave the arena on your feet, or on a cart. And then, one day your name is called, you're told to suit up, your gear is polished, your weapons checked, you're handed a shield you've practiced with, but suddenly it feels foreign, like something borrowed from a dream. The lanista gives you a nod, no speech, no blessings, just a nod. You're led to the gate. It creaks open like a jaw, light spills in, and the noise swallows you. But that's for tomorrow. Tonight, you lie on a bed of straw, staring at the ceiling, your fingers curled around the edge of your rough blanket. You are no longer just a prisoner, or a farmer, or a man with too many debts. You are a gladiator, and tomorrow, Rome will know your name. Before the roar of the crowd, before the sand stains your feet and fear seeps into your armor, there was this place, Ludus Magnus, the grandest of Rome's gladiator schools, nestled just east of the Colosseum. If you could peek beneath the ground, you'd find an entire world carved from stone and sweat, underground tunnels, training arenas, cells, kitchens, infirmaries, and always, the smell of iron. This is where your journey began. You remember it now, clearer with each step forward. The day you arrived, they shaved your head, gave you a number. You weren't a man anymore, you were property, a potential investment, a walking wager, and the lanista, the trainer, manager, and all-around gladiator overlord, made sure you understood that he was not a kind man, but he was efficient. He knew the value of muscle, obedience, and pain. His eyes could scan a dozen recruits and know instantly who might swing a sword like a god and who might swing it once before bleeding out in the dust. Training began at sunrise, and it was relentless. Forget the glamorous duels you imagined. Gladiator school wasn't a noble dojo or a warrior's temple. It was a factory. You were drilled, struck, pushed, thrown, and insulted until your very bones understood combat, and you learned the truth. Gladiator fights weren't chaos, they were choreography, precision theater. You drilled, footwork, until your ankles ached, practiced sword swings on wooden poles called palace, until your shoulders burned. You were paired with a rudus, a wooden sword, to practice technique. If you dropped, you'd regret it. There were shouting matches over shield positions, disputes over stance, elbows cracked, noses bloodied, egos flattened like clay. But through it all, you were taught to survive, not just physically, but reputationally, because in Rome, it wasn't enough to fight well. You had to fight beautifully, make your movements big, dramatic, make your opponent work for the kill, look brave, even when terrified, die well if you must, but make the crowd feel it in their chest. And you weren't alone in this twisted boot camp. There was Titus, a former centurion, gruff and resentful, that he now took orders from a man with a feathered hat. There was Queso, a towering Gaul, with a laugh like thunder and fists, like boulders. There was Livia, yes, a woman, rare, but not unheard of. Gladiatresses trained hard, and died, just as spectacularly. Livia was quicker than any of you, deadlier. 2. She moved like water and struck like lightning. No one mocked her twice. You shared meals, gruel with barley and beans. Nothing fancy, but better than what peasants got. Gladiators needed to bulk up, appear imposing, muscle and showmanship. Rome loved a strong silhouette, and so between drills, you flexed, lifted stones, carried weights, wrestled for dominance. Evenings were worse, wounds cleaned without mercy, scar tissue massaged back into usefulness, silence enforced. Anyone caught breaking curfew was punished, usually with double training, or worse. And then one day, the lanista said your name. You'd been chosen, not for another round of drills, but for a real fight. Your first exhibition match. No killing, just a test, a warm-up, a way to see if you could handle the crowd, the pressure, the performance. You remember standing at the edge of a smaller arena, heart hammering, fingers trembling. The gate opened, and you stepped forward, just like now. But back then the crowd was smaller, the stakes, low. Still, the moment etched itself into your bones. You fought a man named Publius, another rookie. Your blades clashed, like firecrackers. The audience gasped. You took a shallow cut to the thigh on purpose. The lanista said a little blood made the show better. You won. Not by much, but enough. Enough to earn a nod, a better meal, and your name added to a scroll, one that determined who would one day step into the Colosseum proper. That scroll brought you here. Months later, after countless drills, after calluses formed over calluses, after losing friends to infected wounds, and overzealous sparring matches, it was your turn. The Colosseum, the real thing. And now you stand here, on the sand, beneath the sun. Years of training compacted into this single moment, and as the crowd begins to rise, as the emperor waves a languid hand, as the drums begin to beat once more, you remember your footing, because no matter how many fights came before, this is the one that mattered. You were trained for this, you survived for this, and Rome expects a show. The crowd is roaring now, alive, expectant, already drunk on anticipation. But you're focused, you're scanning, you're waiting. Because in this arena, half the battle is knowing who you're about to fight. The other half is figuring out how not to die while doing it. Your opponent hasn't entered yet. That's part of the theater, build-up, suspense, psychological warfare, served on a silver platter. The unknown is scarier than the sword, but in your mind, you run through the possibilities. Maybe it'll be a murmulo. He'll carry a heavy rectangular shield, a gladius, and wear a crested helmet shaped like a fish. He'll be slower than you, but relentless, like trying to wrestle a dinner table that bites. You'll have to dance around him, wear him out, avoid that thick shield slamming into your ribs, or perhaps a Thracian, short curved sword, small square shield, plumed helmet with slits for eyes. They move fast, too fast, but they often overcommit, and if you time it right, well, you've drilled that riposte 100 times. But there are worse possibilities. The Retiarius, for example, net fighter, no helmet, no shield, barely armored, just a weighted net, a trident, and the agility of someone who really doesn't want to be touched. He's a wild card, larps while he fights, dodges instead of block. You could land 10 strikes and never land one clean blow. And if that net wraps around your legs, you're done, you're a fish. And then there's the Secutor, the hunter of the Retiarius. Smooth helmet, minimal eye holes to avoid the trident, broad chest, small shield. These men were designed for silent, steady pursuit. They close the distance and finish it quick. Secutors don't play, but that's just man-to-man combat. The human duels. There are other matches. Sometimes it's not a person at all. Maybe it's a beast. You've heard the story. Lions, bears, leopards, imported from all corners of the empire. Starved, agitated, paraded in on platforms. The Romans called it venatio, beast hunts. Except it wasn't always the beast that got hunted. Gladiators were sometimes pitted against these animals with nothing more than a spear and a prayer. The crowd loved it. To them it was exotic, a reminder of Rome's dominance over all living things. To the gladiator, it was usually a death sentence with claws, and the worst, elephant. Not because they were aggressive, often they weren't, but because when elephants panicked, they trampled everything, including the crowd. There was an infamous match once, where an elephant broke free, turned around, and charged through 3 rows of spectators. Rome didn't repeat that one, but they talked about it for years. Then there are the joke matches, the mismatches. A heavily armed murmillo versus a dwarf, armed with a frying pan. A blindfolded retiarius fighting two boys with wooden sticks. Prisoners dressed in animal skins and told to act like wolves. These aren't fights. They're executions wearing a mask of humor. And yet, the crowd laughs. Rome is many things. Subtle is not one of them. Sometimes it's not even combat at all. It's reenactment. A mythological tale brought to life with you playing the unlucky guy who gets eaten by the sea monster at the end. Spoiler, the sea monster is a man in a costume. The eating part, that's real, just not literal. Usually, and in rare cases, you might fight as a group. Team fight, shields locked together, a mini war for the audience to feast on. You remember your Lannister saying it was like choreography, but with blood. You glance at the gate again, still no opponent. Your heart is hammering anyway. What if it's someone you know? That happens too. You train together, eat together, sometimes survive together. Then one day, the scroll comes down, and two names are read. One of you doesn't come back. It's rare, but not unheard of. You think of Queso, the Gaul, that huge laugh, those heavier footsteps during night drills. What if it's him? Would he fight you? Would you fight him? There's no good answer, because the crowd doesn't care about your friendship. They care about your performance. And if you hesitate, that silence from the stands, that's worse than a wound. Rome rewards valor. It punishes uncertainty. Your hand tightens around your weapon. You try to still your breathing. It could be anyone, or anything. But no matter who walks through that gate, you have a job to do. Not just to survive, to entertain, to bleed convincingly, to fall dramatically, if it comes to that. Because you aren't just a warrior. You're a you are fear wrapped in bronze, strength wrapped in bruises, and for as long as you stand in this arena, you are Rome's most brutal fantasy come to life. The drumbeat changes tempo, faster now, louder, the gate rattles. You ready your stance. Whatever walks out of there you will face it. Because this is not about winning. This is about showing the empire that you deserve to exist a little longer. And the crowd, fickle and feverish, leans forward ready to cast its silent vote. You didn't arrive in the arena fully formed, muscles chiseled, reflexes honed, nerves hardened like sun-baked stone. No, before you ever laid eyes on the Colosseum's shadow, you were dropped into the brutal womb of gladiator training, the ludus. The ludus isn't a school, it's a forge, and you were the metal. You remember your first morning, disoriented, hungry, your old clothes traded for a tunic, and a new name, Novicius, a fresh recruit, a blank slate with bones. A Lannister greeted you, not warmly. Lannisters are like coaches, prison wardens, and investment managers rolled into one. They don't train gladiators out of kindness. They train them for profit. You're a product. You live if you're valuable. You die if you're not. Still, he handed you bread. That was something. Your training ground was a sun-baked courtyard, dirt worn smooth from years of sweat and screams. Wooden swords, practice shields, straw dummies carved into the shape of men who never moved fast enough. You remember the first time you held a practice gladius. Heavier than it looked, more awkward, too. You nearly dropped it. The instructor noticed. You spent the next hour doing laps until your legs forgot how to be angry. Then came the drills. Overhead strike, block, stab, sidestep. Again, again, again. No, not like that. Again. The doctors, your trainers, were relentless. Veterans of the arena, most of them. Men who had survived long enough to earn their retirement and now taught others how not to die quite so fast. Their methods were simple. Repetition, pain, humiliation, and the occasional nod of approval if you did something right. Just enough encouragement to keep you from running headfirst into a wall. They taught you to fall gracefully, not because it was noble, but because falling badly meant broken ribs and a short career. They taught you to take hits without flinching, because the crowd loved a fighter who looked unbothered by sharp objects. And they taught you about rhythm, not music, though there was that, sometimes. Drum beats, horns, but the rhythm of a fight, the pace, when to advance, when to hold, when to breathe. 1 second too slow, and you're a corpse. 1 second too fast, and you're a ghost who swung at nothing. There were sparring matches too. You and another novice circling each other under the morning sun while the doctors barked corrections and occasionally threw pebbles if you hesitated. No one went easy, not even the ones who liked you, especially not them, because liking someone didn't mean sparing them. It meant preparing them. You also learned to eat, like a gladiator, which is to say, well, the diet was surprisingly good. Bread, barley, beans, dried fruits, occasionally cheese. The nickname was hordere, barley men. Your body needed fuel, not finery, bulk, not delicacy. Think of it as the world's first mass gainer plan, with slightly more risk of death. You bulked up, learned where your center of gravity was, got used to pain as a companion, not an enemy, and somewhere along the line you started to change. Not just physically, mentally. You began to see openings in your opponent's movements before they made them. You began to understand your own limits, and how to stretch them, bend them, break them, and reassemble the pieces. You started to sleep less fitfully, not because you were less afraid, but because exhaustion had dulled the edge of panic. Even dreams had muscle cramps now. You learned the different fighting styles. You may have been assigned to a specific type, based on your build and agility. Murmillo, Thrax, Secutor, Retero, each with its own weapons, strengths, weaknesses, traditions. They dressed you for it, fitted you with gear, not for protection, well partially but also for identity. A Murmillo's heavy helmet, a Retereus's net and trident, a Hoplomachus's long spear and circular shield. You weren't just learning how to kill, you were learning how to perform, because in Rome, death was a commodity, but style was a currency. You had to look brave, you had to look skilled, you had to look like you belonged on the sand even if your knees disagreed. They even trained you to die well. Yes, really, not everyone in the arena lived, most didn't, but the crowd didn't want to see fear. They wanted to see defiance, a clean fall, a poetic end, a final glare that said, I knew this was coming and I met it anyway. Sometimes the doctors would stage mock executions. You'd practice collapsing convincingly. It was equal parts tragic and absurd, but Rome was absurd, and methodical. The ludus trained your body and broke your innocence. It taught you that pain is routine, that honor is optional, and that silence is safer than complaint. And in all that time, weeks, months, maybe even years, you learned one unshakable truth. Survival is an art, and in the Roman arena, you are both artist and bright. One stroke too slow, and you disappear, but with enough practice, you just might become a masterpiece. Now that you've trained, eaten your barley, bruised your ribs, and occasionally questioned your life choices, it's time to understand your role. Not just as a gladiator, but as a character in Rome's blood-soaked theater. You see, the arena isn't chaos, it's choreographed. Every match is a narrative, a performance, a live-action morality tale where you are cast, costumed, and critiqued. And you don't get to choose the script. From the moment you step into the sand, you're not yourself anymore. You're a type. Maybe you're a Murmillo, the classic brute, heavily armored, fish-crested helmet, broad rectangular shield. You lumber, you endure, you strike with terrifying finality. The crowd respects your strength, but rarely cheers for your wit. Or perhaps you're a Thrax, modeled after a Thracian warrior, curved sword, small square shield, helmet with a griffin-shaped crest. You move with a dancer's precision. You're not the biggest, but you're clever, tactical, a crowd favorite when you make it past the third round. You might be a Secutor, literally the chaser, designed to fight against the nimble Retiarius, who fights with a trident and net. You wear a smooth helmet to avoid getting tangled. Your breathing is hard, your visibility limited. You're fast, but claustrophobic. Your job, close the distance, make the kill. And then of course there's the Retiarius, the odd one out. No helmet, no chest armor, just a weighted net, a trident, and a dagger for when things get desperate, which they usually do. The crowd loves a Retiarius. Why? Because he's the underdog, the gambler, the exposed strategist, who wins with speed and precision. Each type has its counterpart, its dance partner. You don't just fight, you represent, you symbolize order or rebellion, Rome or its enemies, strength or speed, the line between beast and man. And just as importantly, the crowd knows these types. They watch you enter the arena and whisper, he's a Thrax, watch his footwork, or that one's a Secutor, he'll crush the net fighter in 2 minutes flat. You are judged before the fight even begins, but the role you play doesn't end with your armor. It continues in your posture, your stance, your stare. You learn the art of spectacle, how to taunt with a glance, how to circle, just slowly enough to build tension, how to raise your blade for applause even when your arms ache like boiled roe. And if you fall, fall with drama. Don't curl up, don't whimper, arch your back, stiffen your jaw, pretend death is an inconvenience, not a tragedy, because sometimes you won't die, not if the fight was good. The Emperor, yes, that very important man lounging under embroidered shade, may raise or lower his thumb, determining whether your story continues or ends in the sand. Contrary to popular myth, the thumbs didn't always mean what we think. Some say thumbs up meant death, police verso, while a covered thumb meant mercy. Others argue the reverse, but in practice, it often came down to one thing: entertainment value. If you fought valiantly, if the crowd screamed for you, if your opponent respected you, there was a flicker of survival, a nod from the Emperor, a gesture from the editor of games. Mercy was part of the show, just like blood. In rare cases, you could even earn freedom, a wooden sword rudis, presented in front of a cheering crowd, not a weapon, but a ticket, a symbol that said you have served, you have bled, you may now go. Of course, many fighters never got that sword. Some didn't want it. Strange as it sounds, some gladiators stayed. Fame is a powerful thing, so is routine. So is the illusion of control in a world that offers so little of it. For a slave or a criminal, the arena could be a place of strange dignity, twisted, dangerous dignity, sure, but more than they had outside its gates. And then there are the voluntary, free men who chose to become gladiators. Why? Fame, fortune, the promise of meals and purpose, or maybe just the love of the fight. Rome attracted every kind. In the stands, people cheered like they were watching gods. They waved handkerchiefs, shouted names, carved your likeness into cheap pottery. You weren't just fighting, you were becoming someone, and yet you were still property, still bound to the schedule, the whim of the crowd, the calculations of the editor, who chose which fights would sell. You could train for months and be killed in 4 minutes, or win 7 fights and be broken by the end. But as long as you stepped onto that sand, role intact, posture proud, weapon ready, you were a gladiator, not a man, not a slave, not even a soldier, but a living myth, a breathing fable, an icon that bled. And when you fell, whether in triumph or failure, Rome would cheer and then forget, because next week there'd be another like you, dressed the same, standing where you stood, wearing your role like a borrowed ghost. The gate slams shut behind you with the kind of finality that makes your stomach curl. You're standing in the center now, center of the Colosseum, center of Rome, center of a violent stage, crafted not just of sand and stone, but of centuries-old hunger for spectacle. The crowd towers above you in concentric circles, an avalanche of eyes. You can't see individual faces, just a ripple of robes, a shimmer of gold, the glint of sunlight on polished armor, and sweat-glistened foreheads. Somewhere up there is the Emperor. Somewhere else, a boy drops a date pit into the dirt and doesn't notice. But everyone is waiting, waiting for the fight. And not just any fight, it must be good, compelling, worth the effort of oiling their hair and putting on sandals to come sit in the sun and cheer for someone else's pain. This isn't random violence, this is storytelling, Roman style. Your opponent enters. You don't know his name. Maybe he doesn't have one anymore. Maybe he's a murmillo, with a helmet shaped like a fish's mouth, and a scutum shield that could stop a charging bull. Or maybe he's lean and wiry, a thrax with eyes like sharpened bone and a sword curved for gutting, not slicing. You nod to each other. You don't speak. The crowd doesn't want a conversation. They want drama, a duel, a visible struggle between two forces they can pretend represent more than just desperate survival. Somewhere above, a trumpet wails. A herald announces your names, or at least your roles. You're no longer Gaius, or Dacius, or whatever name you were born with. You're the net, the fish, the beast, the avenger. The crowd begins to chant, rhythmically, like waves, and you move, feet over sand that's been raked clean, the blood of yesterday's losers, scraped off with lime and shovel. You circle, he circles, blades glint, shields edge closer, and then contact. Metal screams. The audience gasps. Your trident clangs off his helmet. You feel the jolt up your arms. He grunts, swings. You duck. The arena echoes with the slap of sandals and the hiss of breath, and the distant rattle of a chained beast somewhere in the underground cells. You don't think, you react. Hours, months, Years of training burn through you like muscle memory set on fire. Jab, pivot, feint, roll. A voice from the stands calls your name. You hesitate for half a heartbeat, enough time to get a cut across your shoulder. It's shallow, warm, you barely register it. You counter with a thrust that misses by a hair. The sand shifts under you. It always shifts, as if trying to claim you back. And that's part of the design too. The Colosseum sand is meant to be unstable. It makes for better falls. Blood soaks in better, less mess, less cleanup. You stumble. He lunges. The crowd cheers louder now. They can smell the tension. They're practically salivating. This isn't just a fight. This is bread and circuses. This is what keeps them loyal, keeps them distracted, keeps them Roman. Somewhere above, a noble woman fans herself and looks bored. You refocus. Feet planted, shield high. Your opponent's breathing ragged. He's tiring. You're tiring. The sun isn't kind. Your armor pinches in strange places, and the blood on your arm has started to dry, tugging at your skin. You press the advantage. A quick jab, a slip past his guard, a sweep. He's down. You stand above him, weapon raised. Not to kill, not yet. You wait, because the final decision isn't yours. It belongs to the editor of the games, or the emperor, or the crowd. Maybe all of them. You stand, arm locked, muscles burning, and scan the rows of cheering Romans. They begin to signal. Some raise their thumbs, others turn them down, still others wave handkerchiefs or clap, or shout. The noise swells and fragments and surges like 1,000 opinions trying to be law. Your opponent, bleeding from the thigh, raises one hand, a plea, or a performance. He played his part. He fell with dignity. Now they decide if he leaves the stage. You keep your face still, impassive. You've seen men weep and lose the crowd. You've seen others grin defiantly and win mercy. The emperor leans forward, his expression unreadable. He raises his hand, holds it, then, thumb to the side, covered. A gesture of mercy. You exhale. A strange mix of relief and disappointment floods your chest. Because sometimes it's easier when it's decided for you. You lower your weapon, step back. 2 attendants rush out, slaves with stretchers and wet cloth. They carry your opponent off like a wounded actor in a play. He'll live, maybe fight again, maybe not, but the crowd is pleased. You hear applause, scattered at first, then grow. You raise your weapon, not in victory, but in acknowledgement, not of them, of the moment. You are not dead, you are still in the story, and in Rome that is no small thing. As you walk back toward the gate, toward the shadowed tunnels that smell of iron and fear, you hear one final thing that sticks in your mind. A child, asking his mother, is he a hero? The mother replies, for today, and that is enough. The crowd fades behind you as you step into the mouth of the tunnel, where sun becomes shadow, and cheers become echoes. The sudden quiet hits harder than the fight. You've just stared death in the eye and winked, and now you're just sore. The air in the underbelly of the Colosseum is heavier, cooler, dustier. It smells like rust, damp wool, and old bread. Someone hands you a damp cloth. Another hands you a bowl of something warm. Barley stew, probably. Could be lentils. Could be leftovers from yesterday's games. Could be horse. You eat it anyway, slowly. You're not alone. Other gladiators move past you, some limping, some laughing, a few too quiet to be anything but broken on the inside. A retiarius leans against the wall, trailing blood from a knee wound he swears isn't serious. A murmillo has a cracked helmet and an arm in a sling, still boasting about the move that nearly took his opponent's leg. There's camaraderie here, sure, but not quite friendship. Everyone knows that tomorrow, next week, or next month, you might be trying to kill the same person you're currently sharing water with. It's not personal, it's just the program. You make your way through the hypogeum, the labyrinth of underground chambers and service corridors that make up the guts of the arena. The public never sees this part. It's not for show, it's where animals are kept in cages, where props are hauled up on pulleys, where gladiators pace and mutter and pray and change. This is the part of Rome that's built on bones. You pass a chamber with barred doors. Inside, lions, not pacing, just watching. Their eyes glow faintly in the dark, like gods too bored to smite. The beasts are fed just enough to stay strong, not enough to stay calm. You don't linger. Further in, a handler brushes down a bear, someone sharpens spears, another worker, barely more than a child, resets a broken net for a future fight. A trapdoor overhead bangs shut with a clang that makes you flinch. Even in safety, the place still bites. Finally, you reach the training hall. Here, the sand is smoother, cleaner, bloodless. The Ludus Magnus, Rome's largest gladiator school, is attached directly to the Colosseum. You can walk the tunnel between them blindfolded. Some have, some still do, after particularly bad matches. Your doctor greets you. Only a scratch, he says, squinting at your shoulder. You nod. He pours wine over it anyway, which stings like betrayal. Then he rubs in a thick paste of herbs and something you don't want to identify. You hiss. He laughs. Good, means you're not dead. Bandaged, bruised, and borderline conscious, you lower yourself onto a stone bench and watch the other fighters train, sparring, stretching, arguing about footwork. One man, massive, bearded, rumored to be from Dacia, chops a wooden post until it snaps. He's popular, has his own fan chants. Kids in the crowd paint his face onto their pottery shards. You're new, but you lived. That means something. And maybe more important, it means you earned tonight's meal. A proper one. Bread, olives, cheese, and maybe, if the Lanasta is feeling generous, a slice of roasted meat. Not goose, not boar, just something hot and filling, and not made of mystery. Your Lanasta, the man who owns you, makes a note on a wax tablet as you pass. A good performance means a better rating. A better rating means more attention, more matches, more danger, and possibly more freedom. Because that's the carrot they dangle, isn't it? Not all gladiators are slaves, some are volunteers, others are condemned criminals, but all fight under contract, and some, just a few, earn their freedom. A rudis, a wooden sword, not a toy, a symbol. If you survive enough fights, impress the right people, or win the crowd's love, you might be awarded a rudis and walk away, free, scarred, yes, changed, definitely, but no longer property. You glance over at a wooden rudis hanging on the wall. It's covered in dust. No one earned it last month, or the month before. You lie back and close your eyes. The stone is cool. Your muscles throb in strange places. The crowd's cheers still echo in your ears, like phantom waves breaking over a distant shore. For a moment you almost fall asleep, but the sounds never truly stop. A metal gate slamming, the clink of armor, the whisper of sand under sandals. You remember the fight, the weight of the trident, the look in your opponent's eyes, the tension in your jaw as you waited for the Emperor's signal. You wonder where he is now, drinking wine, telling stories, nursing a wound, dead, still alive and dreaming of his own rudis? You hope so, not out of kindness, out of practicality. Good opponents make for good fights keep the crowd happy, and happy crowds don't demand new blood. You're beginning to understand that survival here isn't just about skill, it's about spectacle. You must be memorable. Every time you enter the arena, you must give them a show. If you die, die dramatically. If you win, win theatrically. There's no prize for subtlety. You sit up and look at your armor, still smeared with sand and sweat, and something a bit more ominous. You'll clean it later, or not. Some say the grime brings luck. Others say the gods prefer things real. You've made it through one day, one fight. How many more? No one knows. But for now, you're alive. The Colosseum rests. The crowd sleeps. The torches flicker low. Somewhere above, Rome carries on, indifferent, eternal, and always hungry for the next show. And you wait, because dawn will come, and with it, the next name on the list. Maybe it'll be yours. You wake not to a trumpet, but to the thud of a training sword smacking against a wooden dummy. It's morning, or what passes for it here in the Ludus Magnus. The dormitory walls are damp and undecorated, save for scratch marks, tally counts, and the occasional crude drawing of a victorious moment or an imagined one. One man has drawn a crude outline of a rudis beside his bunk. He adds a new tick mark every morning. You sit up slowly. Everything hurts. That's how you know you're still employed. The training yard is already alive. Gladiators of all sizes and disciplines are warming up. Some stretch, some spar, some just sit on the stone benches and mutter to themselves, like men reciting prayers or curses or grocery lists. You can't tell the difference anymore. Breakfast is simple. Barley porridge, again. It's thick and vaguely bitter, but it does the job. Sometimes you get dates, sometimes a fig, usually not. No one complains out loud, but the silence says it all. You gear up, not in full armor, that's for the arena, but in training pads and practice weapons. The wooden sword, the dull trident, the padded shield. They're heavier than they look, designed to build muscle, or character, or both. Today, you train under the eye of Doctor, not his real name, just what everyone calls him. The trainer, the enforcer, the man who yells at you until you fight like you mean it. He watches everything. The tilt of your shield, the angle of your foot, the moment your focus slips, and when it does, again, he barks. So you do it again, and again, and again, because failure in the yard means failure in the arena, and failure in the arena, well, we both know what that means. You train in formations, murmulis against threeses, retiari against secotor, all matched for contrast and crowd appeal. The fights are choreographed in theory, but chaos is always lurking nearby, just like in the real thing. You break for water, a moment's rest. The man beside you, tall, wiry, missing half an ear, leans over and says, "They say a senator is coming to watch tomorrow. That means one of us dies." You nod, not because you agree, just because because it sounds about right. By mid-morning, the sweat has soaked through your tunic, and the muscles in your forearms feel like they're trying to crawl out of your skin. But you press on. Doctor says pain is temporary, which is funny, coming from someone with a limp and 3 visible scars on his face. Around noon, you're allowed a proper break. Some lie down in the shade, some check their gear. One guy with a broken nose carves his initials into a spear shaft. Another man kneels in front of a small altar, just a rock with a carved symbol of Jupiter, and whispers the names of his children. No one interrupts. You clean your gear, you repair the straps, you oil your sword, even if it's just a training blade. The act matters. It tells the world you intend to return with it. You overhear 2 young fighters arguing about tactics. One swears by feints, the other trusts raw aggression. They both get knocked down by Doctor for being loud. Justice is swift here, and rarely poetic. Afternoon drills are worse. The sun beats down on the yard, and the sand sticks to your sweat. You practice rolls, dodges, blocks. Your knees ache, your ribs protest. Your shoulders feel like they've been attacked by lions. You've learned that the arena doesn't care how good your form is if your lungs give out, so you keep going, breathing through the pain, wincing through the fatigue. Then you start to notice something. You're getting better. Your movements are tighter, your stance more balanced, your strikes land harder. You're not just surviving training anymore, you're learning to perform, because that's what this is, not just combat. Not just sport, it's theater. The crowd doesn't care about technique. They want a story, a hero, a villain, a turning point, a gasp-worthy moment where it all could have gone wrong, but didn't. And if you can give them that, you might live to fight again. The day winds down, the drills soften, the sun begins to dip, shadows stretch across the training yard like fingers from the gods. You collapse onto the bench and let your head fall back. You're still alive, and now you're tired enough that even the stone slab in your dormitory feels like a featherbed. Dinner is more barley, but hot and plentiful. You even get a strip of meat. Luxury. Conversation hums softly among the fighters, low, gruff, sprinkled with laughter. Someone tells a story about a ludus in Gaul, where fighters trained on horseback. Someone else insists he once beat a retiarius with just a broken shield strap and sheer willpower. You don't know what's true. It doesn't matter. The stories are the currency here. They pass the time, soften the fear, and turn men into legends, even if just for a night. Before lights out, you return to your bunk. Your sword rests beside you. You glance at the tally marks on the wall. You add one of your own. One more day down. How many left? No one knows. But if tomorrow comes, and the Emperor is watching, and the crowd is thirsty, then you'll do what you've trained to do. You'll put on the mask, step into the sand, and become whatever the audience needs you to be. Fighter, villain, hero, whatever it takes to see another night. You're on your knees now. The dust of the Colosseum clings to your lips, your knees, your soul. The sun has shifted overhead, casting longer shadows from the arena's rim, like the hands of a celestial clock. Around you, the crowd trembles with a single murmuring breath, held in anticipation. You feel it in your ribs, in your spine, a tremor of judgment hanging in the air like the last note of a funeral hymn. Your weapon lies several feet away, flung there when your opponent's blow struck home. A shallow cut, thankfully, but enough to land you here, kneeling in the dust, armor cracked, pride bruised, and eyes scanning the imperial box. Because now the decision isn't yours. It never really was. The Emperor leans forward in his cushioned seat, framed by ivory columns and shaded by silken canopies, his expression unreadable. Beside him, advisors whisper. A noble woman fans herself lazily, eyes fixed on you like she's choosing between grapes at market. You raise your right arm, not in salute, not in defiance, but in appeal. It's the moment every gladiator dreads, the moment you must rely, not on steel, not on strategy, but on spectacle. Mercy, if granted, is earned not through strength, but through story, through drama, through how well you played your part in Rome's most brutal theater. You hope you bled just enough, struggled long enough, died almost well enough. The crowd stirs, some cheer, others boo. Coins change hands, wagers are resolved. A man in the 5th row shouts something you can't hear, but it makes a woman beside him cover her mouth in horror. The old senator at the edge of the Emperor's days chuckles softly, as though he's seen this all before, and he has, because this is not a duel, it's a vote, and here come the thumbs. Let's clear up the myth first. Thumbs up did not mean let him live, nor did thumbs down guarantee death. Ancient sources are conflicting, and modern historians still argue about the gestures. Some suggest that a turned thumb, possibly upwards, signaled death, mimicking a sword thrust. Others argue it was a thumb pressed into a closed fist, to mean mercy. In reality, it probably didn't matter. What mattered was the crowd's mood, the Emperor's mood, the narrative spun in the dust and blood of the arena. Did you die well? Did you entertain? Did you flinch? Did your opponent show valor or cowardice? The answers to these questions decide whether you get to rise from the sand or become part of it. You glance to your opponent. He stands at the ready, weapon still in hand, breathing heavy, a flicker of uncertainty in his posture. He's waiting too. Even in victory, he's not safe. To deliver the final blow without permission, that's a crime. To hesitate when ordered to kill, that's weakness. The Emperor raises his hand. A pause. The crowd quiets. And then, the thumb, the judgment. It happens in an instant, but it feels like hours, long enough for your mind to play back every moment of your fight. Each dodge, each wound, each audience reaction like ghostly applause echoing inside your skull. The decision comes down, not just to your skill, but your symbolism. Are you a hero worth cheering, a villain worth punishing, or just another nameless body in the theater of state control? Sometimes gladiators were spared because they were popular, sometimes because the crowd admired their bravery, sometimes simply because they were too expensive to waste. Other times, you wonder if your trainer paid extra to ensure your odds were better, if your performance earned enough favor to keep you breathing, if that senator who nodded during your entrance will lift his voice now in your defense. The Emperor nods. The decision is given. You hold your breath. If mercy is granted, your opponent will lay down his sword. A medicus will approach, clean your wounds, and you'll be led back under the stands, back into the darkness of the ludus, back to heal, to train, to fight again. If not, you close your eyes for a moment, as though preparing yourself, not just for the blow, but for the honor of receiving it without fear. The philosophy of the arena demands it. To die well was to serve Rome, the audience, the emperor, the gods. Gladiators who showed dignity in defeat were admired, remembered, immortalized in carvings, in poems, in whispers behind tavern doors. You open your eyes, your opponent takes a step forward, the crowd erupts. The emperor leans back in his seat, and you wait, caught between worlds, between breaths, between the edge of steel and the whim of Rome. Because in the arena, death is not the worst fate, obscurity is, and in this moment, you are more than a man or a woman, you are myth in the making. Before you ever stepped onto the blood-stained sand of the Colosseum, before the crowd even knew your name or shouted it in a frenzy, you were here in the ludus, the gladiator training school. A curious term, ludus. It implies play, sport, a game. But there's very little playful about what happens inside these stone walls. The air is thick with sweat, dust, and barked commands. You remember it well. Your first day, the guards marched you through a low wooden gate, into a courtyard lined with sand, scattered training dummies, and hardened men whose faces looked like they were carved from fatigue. Some had scars, others had tattoos. All had the quiet, restless energy of people who've stared death in the face and learned to nod politely. You were assessed, weighed, catalogued. You had a number before you had a name. A wooden tag was tied to your neck. Your identity reduced to string and scribble. Then came the basics, not of war, of theater. Because a gladiator was not just a killer, a gladiator was a performer, expected to die with dignity or live with flair. Every lunge, every dodge, every dramatic final blow was part choreography, part instinct. You trained with a wooden sword first, rudous, light, blunt, deceptively innocent. But your arms still ached from swinging it. Your back screamed from the drills. You practiced footwork until the soles of your sandals gave up in protest. Your instructor, a former champion whose name everyone whispered, and no one dared say aloud, watched you constantly. Eyes up, he'd growl. Strike like it matters. Don't flinch, ever. And so you didn't. Eventually, the other trainees weren't your friends. Not really. They were competitors, future opponents, maybe even execution. But camaraderie blooms strangely in places where death is part of the curriculum. You learned each other's stories between drills. A Dacian prisoner who used to be a prince, a Gaul with one eye, and a grin full of missing teeth. A Roman debtor who'd sold himself into the arena to wipe his slate clean. They came from everywhere. Rome had a way of turning enemies into entertainment. There were ranks too. Novicius, newbies, like you. Tiro, first-timers ready for debut. Veteranus, those who'd survived a few games and lived to tell about it. And then of course the ruderagerie, those who'd been granted their freedom, retired, technically, but some returned anyway, for the money, or the glory, or because outside the arena, they no longer knew who they were. You remember watching one such man fight, years older than the rest, but sharp, efficient, every movement was poetry. He bowed to the crowd before his first strike. He won in under a minute, and afterward, he limped away alone. You always wondered what he was thinking. Your own progress came slowly. You weren't strong, not at first, but you learned. You became fast, observant. Your footwork improved. You stopped dropping your weapon. You started winning drills. Eventually, they gave you your first real blade. It was a heavy moment, heavier than the sword itself. Because from that day forward, you were no longer pretending. You were in training for death. Not necessarily your own, but someone's. Then came your first match. It wasn't in the Colosseum, of course. That honor was reserved for seasoned fighters, or those with a flair for showmanship. No, your debut was in a smaller arena, dustier, less grand, but just as hungry. Your opponent was a Scythian with arms like tree trunks. You were terrified, but you remembered the drill. You remembered to keep your feet moving, to strike with purpose. And when it was over, you stood. He didn't. The crowd cheered. Someone threw a laurel branch. It landed at your feet. You didn't feel triumphant. Not really. Just relieved. And very, very tired. But back at the Ludus, your name was spoken differently. Not with contempt, but curiosity. You were no longer invisible. You were a gladiator now. The training didn't end. It never did. Each day was more drills, more sparring, more whispered bets between the trainers. You were being polished like a blade for public use. You learned the different fighting styles. Murmillo, with sword and tall shield. Heavy armor. Threx with curved blade and greaves. Ruterageris, the net and trident fighter. Fast and vulnerable. Secutor, helmeted, aggressive, trained to hunt. Each had strength. Each had weaknesses. You were assigned your type, not based on preference, but on your build, your demeanor, even your facial expressions. The goal wasn't fairness. The goal was entertainment. Eventually your time came. Your name was inscribed on the game's roster, and you were told to report to the Colosseum. You remember packing, not clothes, just a small token, perhaps a charm, or a scrap of fabric from home. Something to remind you that you had been someone else once. Now, your only identity was spectacle, and your fate, decided not by gods, not by emperors, but by an audience hungry for drama. You've now walked the sand, heard the cheers, tasted dust and fear. But before the next match begins, let's pause and talk about endings. Specifically, the ones waiting behind every cheer. Because when you become a gladiator, you don't just learn how to fight, you learn how to die well. There are rules to this, not official rules. Of course, Rome doesn't hand out manuals for death, but there are expectations, customs, performances, really. After all, the crowd didn't pay to see you trip and fall into a sword. They want a show. Let's start with the obvious. Your opponent. He is not your enemy. He is your mirror. You were both chewed up by the same empire and spit into the same arena. You might even know his name, might have shared bread with him at the Ludus. But now you circle one another, under a blazing sun, blades drawn, waiting for the moment someone makes a mistake. Mistakes here are rarely forgiven. Some duels end quickly, a clean strike, a sudden drop, silence. Others, a crowd favorite, let's say a famed Thrax with a bright helmet and blood-red shield gets knocked to the ground. He drops his weapon, he raises one hand, fingers curled into a fist. It's a gesture, a plea. Monsieur, the act of surrender. Now comes the real performance. He kneels, keeps his back straight, head bowed. He must look noble, brave, worthy. The crowd roars. They debate. Some shout for mercy, others for blood. The final decision, that's up to the editor of the games. Sometimes a magistrate, sometimes the emperor himself. If the editor gives a thumbs up, mercy, the defeated lives. Thumbs down, well, that's not what you think it is. Contrary to popular belief, the Romans probably didn't use thumbs down to signal death. Scholars still debate the exact gesture, possibly a turned thumb or even a fist. Either way, the result is the same. The victor steps forward, The final blow must be clean, efficient, right between the collarbone and heart. It is not done with joy, it is done with duty. You learn, over time, to appreciate the ones who make it quick. But let's say the gods, or the crowd favor you. You win. What happens then? You're led back through the gates. Maybe you're given wine, bread, sometimes even coin. Your name is praised, etched into records, shouted in taverns. You're a hero, for now, but heroism has a short shelf life in the arena, and the next match waits. Let's talk about the kinds of gladiators you may face. Not all matches are man versus man. Sometimes the arena gets creative. There are Venationes beast hunts, lions, bears, crocodiles, even ostriches for some reason. Armed with little more than a spear, you might find yourself facing a creature that has no interest in showmanship, and even less in subtlety. There are naval battles, naumachia, flooded arenas where men fight on rafts, slipping on wet planks, while the crowd throws wine-soaked bread from the safety of their dry seats. And sometimes, executions are disguised as game. Criminals, noxai, are tossed into the ring with no weapons at all, forced to act out famous myths, before being dramatically dispatched by trained gladiators, dressed as monsters or heroes. It's gruesome, tragic, the crowd eats it up, death becomes theater, and the line between justice and entertainment, blurred to the point of absurdity. But not every fight ends in death. Some matches are declared draws, others are staged exhibitions, mock fights to show off skill without bloodshed. These are rare, often reserved for famous rudiari, retired gladiators, brought back for a payday, and a little applause. Still, the risk is always there. A slip, a wrong parry, a broken weapon, and suddenly, a staged performance becomes very real. You learn to read the sand like a map. Bloodstains tell stories. Scuff marks reveal footwork patterns. Sometimes you step into a match, and see a dark patch in the corner still wet. You avoid it, not out of fear, but respect. That spot belonged to someone yesterday. It might belong to you tomorrow. Let's not forget the wild cards, drunk editors, rioting crowds, exotic animals that escape their cages mid-match. One day, you hear of a rhinoceros that refused to fight and instead trotted straight into the stands. Chaos, hilarity. One senator lost a shoe, and his dignity. Another day, a gladiator famously faked his death, only to leap up mid-procession and win the match with a dramatic flourish. The crowd cheered for 20 minutes. He was executed the next day. Rome loved drama. Rome hated surprises. Survival, in the arena, isn't about brute strength. It's about reading the room, playing the part, knowing when to show mercy, and when to demand it, when to bleed, and when to make it look like you bled more than you did. Sometimes a well-timed fall can save your life. Sometimes a single phrase, shouted at the right noble, can change your fate. There's power in spectacle, and those who master it, they live. For now, you wrap your bandages, sharpen your blade, listen to the crowd outside rising in anticipation. Another fight begins, and you wonder, what kind of ending are they hoping for today? The arena is quieter now. Not silent. Rome doesn't do silence, but quieter. The kind of hush that drapes over a place after something intense has happened. Like the pause after thunder, or the stillness that follows a scream. You're standing, or rather swaying gently in place. Your knees feel like they're made of damp bread, and your arm won't quite lower that sword, even though it's long since stopped being useful. The blood on your tunic is yours, but not entirely. The ache in your ribs might be a cracked bone, or just an overzealous bruise. Hard to say. Either way, you've made it. Sort of. Because in the Colosseum, survival isn't victory, it's just the beginning of the next question. You glance at your opponent, still lying where he fell, slumped against the sand like a puppet whose strings were snipped mid-show. He's breathing, barely. His eyes flutter open, then closed. The crowd waits, and that's when you feel it, the shift in atmosphere. The eyes of thousands narrowing into one shared gaze, the collective breath drawn in, sharp and expectant. Everyone is waiting for the same thing, judgment. You've heard the stories, of course, everyone has, about emperors with raised thumbs or lowered ones, about mercy and death decided by a single finger. But the truth is, it's all a little less cinematic. Roman signals aren't exactly standardized. There's no scoreboard, no referee with a whistle, just ambiguity, wrapped in tradition. If the emperor wants you dead, you'll know. Maybe. He might give the signal himself, a subtle turn of the wrist, a flick of the hand. More often, he just watches the crowd. Because in Rome, power is performative. The emperor may rule, but the mob has opinions, and it shouts them freely. Mitig. Someone screams. Spare him. Ugula. Another bellows. Finish him. It becomes a chorus of chaos. Some want blood, others want mercy. Most just want a good story to tell at dinner. You look toward the emperor's box. He's reclining slightly, elbow on the armrest, expression unreadable. He's already watched half a dozen matches today. You're either just another one, or the one he'll remember. You glance back at your opponent. He lifts one hand, weakly, a twitch. You don't know, but you lower your sword, slowly, deliberately, and you wait. The crowd holds its breath, and then he gestures. The emperor lifts one hand, and gives what could be interpreted as a sign of mercy, or dismissal. You can't tell. The gate creaks open behind you. A pair of attendants rush out, and begin dragging the fallen fighter toward the tunnel. He's alive, for now, and so are you. You turn and limp toward the exit. Your limbs protest. Your thoughts blur. Every nerve in your body screams for stillness, but there's still protocol to follow. The medics, such as they are, await behind the scenes, and even if your heart feels like it might jump out of your chest, your job isn't quite finished. The moment you pass under the archway and out of the sun, it's like walking from a furnace into a cave. Cool shadows swallow you up. The sound dulls instantly. The roar of the arena becomes a distant murmur. You're in the guts of the Colosseum again, where fighters are made, fixed or forgotten. Someone tosses you a rag. You press it against your shoulder. It comes away wet and red, but not alarmingly so. You'll keep the arm. A medicus appears. He smells like boiled onions and cheap wine, and wears a grim expression that says he's seen worse, but only barely. He looks you over, pokes a few bruises, and mutters something about soaking in vinegar and sleeping on your side. He wraps your arm in linen that was probably white once, then points to a bench against the wall. You sit, you breathe, you exist. Across from you, another gladiator is having a spearhead removed from his thigh. He does not scream, not because it doesn't hurt, but because dignity in this place is more valuable than comfort. Nearby, a boy sharpens a blade that looks suspiciously like the one you just used. A reminder that every weapon here has a history. Every piece of armor, every drop of blood on the floor, it all adds to the mythos. Your trainer approaches, the lanista. His tunic is spotless. As usual, he studies you with the practiced eye of a man assessing the value of livestock. He says nothing at first. Then, with a slight nod, he mutters, "You made them cheer. That'll help." That's as close to a compliment as you're going to get. You're escorted to your cell, a generous term for a space smaller than most closets. There's a mat on the floor, a bucket in the corner, and a thin blanket that smells of every man who's used it before you. You sit again, back against the wall, and let your head rest. The pain settles in slowly, now that the adrenaline has vanished. Your hands tremble. You feel the weight of the day in your bones, in your chest, in the soles of your feet. And yet, part of you is still humming, still alert, because this isn't over. You're not free. Some fighters dream of the rudies, the wooden sword given to those who earn their freedom, but that's rare. Most die long before then. Others are sold to different arenas, traded like game pieces. A few become celebrities, hailed in bathhouses, and painted on walls. You're not there yet, but you're not dead, which in gladiator math is a win. You lean your head back, close your eyes, and hear the muffled sound of the next match, beginning above. More cheers, more names shouted into the sky. Someone else steps into the sand, and the machine turns once more. Morning creeps in like a cat, with cold feet. You wake not because you're rested, but because someone is shouting again. It echoes off the stone walls of the barracks, gruff, bored, and far too awake for your taste. You blink, your body aches in new places. One eye refuses to open fully. You feel like you slept inside a wine barrel that rolled down a hill twice. The scent in the room is equal parts sweat, iron, and something vaguely resembling old cabbage. The match is over, has been for hours, but your role in this life doesn't end when the crowd goes home. Because in ancient Rome, a gladiator's legacy is more than just a list of kills or dramatic poses in the sand. It's a commodity, A brand, a story retold in murals, gossip, and broken teeth. And now, you're part of it, willing or not. You sit up slowly, there's no ceremony to it, no parade of servants, just your aching spine and a mat that smells like defeat. Someone tosses you a crust of bread, another points toward a bucket of what might be water or might be soup. You drink it anyway, out in the training yard. The drills have already begun. Newer recruits are working through footwork, learning how not to trip over their own sandals while holding a sword. One of them slips, another laughs, a third gets smacked in the chest with a wooden practice blade and mutters something in a dialect you don't recognize. Your doctor, the head trainer, paces between them like a hawk with shin splints. His face is all angles. His voice has two settings, thunder and silence. He sees you limping into the yard and gives a single nod. You survived. That's all the praise you're going to get. But it's more than most. The Colosseum isn't hosting games today, but that doesn't mean things are quiet. Somewhere in the distance, merchants bark about dried figs and amphorae of cheap wine. Tourists, even back then, walk past the arena's great arches and point at statues with names they can't pronounce. Life goes on. Because in Rome, the show never really ends. It just changes costumes. You join the others in the training ring. They look at you with new eyes, some with respect, some with resentment, one with envy, so sharp it could shave iron. Fame, even minor, doesn't come without friction. The sand beneath your feet feels different than it did yesterday, softer, maybe, or perhaps you're just paying more attention now. Every grain here holds a memory, 100 matches, 1,000 echoes. Each drop of blood that fell here didn't vanish. It soaked in, seeped through, became part of the legend. That's the thing about gladiators. Their stories are written in sand and scars. No epic poems, no great tomb, just memories passed down by people who watched, whispered, and occasionally wept. As you rest between drills, someone approaches, young, maybe 15, with wide eyes and calloused hands. He sits beside you, quietly at first. Then in a voice barely above a breath, he asks, "What's it like?" You know what he means. He isn't asking about the fight. He's asking about standing in the center of the arena, alone, while the crowd roars and the emperor squints, and the sun turns your armor into an oven. You think for a moment, then finally, you say, "It's loud." He nods like that, answers everything. Later, a scribe arrives, thin, cloaked, with ink-stained fingers, and an expression like he's always smelling something foul. He's here to collect details for the arena records, maybe even a public register of victory. He asks for your name, your origin, the weapon you used. He sketches a rough likeness, which makes you look a bit like a confused goat. You say nothing, because if the crowd remembers your name, if your portrait gets painted in faded colors on the wall of a tavern, then maybe, just maybe, you've earned something that outlasts the pain. But fame is fickle. Even the greatest gladiators are forgotten eventually. Their wooden swords, if they ever received one, are buried with them or sold to the next eager recruit. Their stories survive only as long as someone bothers to repeat them. You've seen the fading mural in the side corridor, one that shows a gladiator lifting a net, triumphant over a fallen foe. The paint is cracked, the name is smudged. Time, as always, wins. Back in your cell that evening, you trace the outline of a small carving etched into the wall, 4 tally marks, and then 1 diagonal slash, someone's record, a life measured in matches. You add 1 to your own. Tomorrow may bring another fight, or not. You've learned not to guess. But tonight, you lie on your mat, stare at the ceiling, and think about all the men who came before you, who stood where you stood, fought where you fought, and vanished into the same worn history. And despite it all, the wounds, the fear, the constant performance, you feel something strange. Not pride exactly, but clarity, because in this brutal, calculated theater of survival, where life is a coin tossed before a crowd, you are still here, you existed, you were seen. And in ancient Rome, where slaves were shadows and commoners were noise, that's no small thing. You hear footsteps outside your cell, the clank of chains, the mutter of guards. A rooster crows in the distance, oblivious to the weight of legacy. You pull the blanket over your chest, feel the faint pulse in your bruised wrist, and close your eyes. The arena sleeps, and so do you, for now.